Hello, welcome to Odor Always Moves, the video series that translates the complexity of odor movement down to the operational level for canine handlers and trainers. This is the sixth video in the series, and today we're going to be covering building ventilation systems, and specifically the types of ventilation systems that we may encounter on a search, and then the impact they have on odor movement. As always, this is dedicated to my first bomb dog, Daisy. And this is for educational purposes only. I'm going to give some tips and tricks from my experience, but really, this is just to kind of give you an understanding of the overall concepts of air movement and thus subsequent odor movement. Now, the types of ventilation systems that we're going to talk about is natural air exchange and mechanical air exchange. And then mechanical specifically of localized exhaust, or also called point source. And those are typically in bathrooms and kitchens. And then the whole structure type ventilation system. And they usually have a supply and exhaust, and usually associated with central air, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning type systems. Now, a natural ventilation system, this just uses the natural airflow to pull air in and then exhaust it out different locations, in typically like roof vents or attic spaces. And the best example of this is just opening up your windows on a nice summer day. Okay, you get a nice breeze, it moves the air and it exchanges the air inside the structure with the air from the outside. Okay, basically bringing in fresh air and pushing out the old air. Very common in large commercial or livestock buildings, warehouses. You've probably seen the silver, cylindrical vents up on the top that spin. That's essentially is. That's just a natural one. It's using the wind to turn those vents up on the top, and that pulls out the air from the inside. So the effectiveness of these systems really does depend, though, on the wind speed. If there's no wind, it's not that effective. Now, an air exchange system, there are ones that are mechanically based, and that's where they use fans to basically pull fresh air in and old air out. And this is really common in like subterranean homes or even caves, that kind of thing, but also homes that use radiant floor heating where there's no central air system. And you want to exchange out that old air, otherwise it's smelling musky, and you build up moisture and potential for mold. And so those are mechanical air exchange systems, and they're not designed for heating or cooling specifically. They're just designed to move air in and exchange the air, literally, as it's called. It exchanges the air. Fresh air is replacing the old air. And these are typically slower air flows. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, is that they're very, very slow usually. Now, the mechanical ventilation systems that really impact us as canine handlers is the ones that are fan based, and they're designed to move larger volumes of air. And the first one we're going to talk about is called a localized exhaust system, and it's also called a point source. And that would be like a fan in a bathroom or kitchen, okay, to where you turn it on, the fan turns on, it pulls air from that particular room and exhausts it. It's not designed to exchange air, it's just designed to pull the air out, and air from the other rooms will move into it. But the bottom line is it's not really impacting the other rooms, okay? So it's localized, it's just impacting that room. So if you turn a fan on in a bathroom, that can impact how that odor is moving in that room. Specifically, it's going to go towards that fan and then out the exhaust port. Now the other part or other system we're going to talk about is a whole structure, okay, and that's where a system has a mechanical force, a fan or a blower that's moving the air, and it's designed to move it through the entire structure or large zones of that structure. And it can be single or multiple blowers. So obviously, the larger the facility, you're going to see multiple blowers, multiple systems, and we'll show that in one of the models. And then rooms have both an inlet vent and a return outlet vent. So understanding where those vents are And what they're doing will help you understand kind of how the air may be moving in that environment. And they're all coming from or returning to that blower. So we basically, we turn this on, fresh air is pulled into the system, it goes through the fan, and there may be a heating and cooling element in that area, depends on the system, and that air is pushed into the zones or rooms that it's designed to serve. Okay, that causes circulation within each of those zones, each of those rooms, and then that return inlet pulls that air out and returns it to the fan, and then it exhausts, and the cycle just keeps repeating. Okay, so but as you can imagine, that impacts every room, every zone, and if that system is on, then it is moving and circulating that air, and we'll see that in the models. Now the ventilation systems, the thing I really want you to remember is the primary purpose is to move air. Okay, and it results in that exchange of old air with fresh air, which can reduce concentrations of odors. And then the secondary purpose is often heating or cooling of that environment. So in order to do that effectively, they purposely try to circulate and spread out that air as much as possible because that makes heating and cooling more efficient. Okay, and to understand that if you activate or shut down a ventilation system, it can have a huge impact on the movement of odor in that structure, and we'll see that in the models. Now, this first model, some of you may already be familiar with this. This is based on one that I did as a presentation at the Joint Symposium for Working Canines, and it's just showing a church and with an odor source up in the front view. Now, what you're seeing here is the extent of the odor, but with no ventilation system running. And so this shows 90 seconds, and the extent is based on molecular diffusion only. And all that is just the molecules bouncing off one another and spreading out naturally, as you know, all gases will do in time. So this is 90 seconds with no HVAC running. And now this is that same time frame, 90 seconds, but the ventilation system has been turned on. And you can see that we have some, these roof inlets here, and these are all directional, so they're basically going to the left or right. And then you have some return outlets up here, okay? And you may look at that and it's like, well, yeah, I see some deformation to that plume, but it's not that different from the one we just saw where there was no HVAC. And so you may be wondering what's going on. What's the big deal? Well, this is that same model after 10 minutes. That odor's everywhere. That's the big deal. And if you think about it, the ventilation system is designed to circulate air and to make it equal throughout the whole system. Okay? But you can see there's areas of pretty substantial concentration well away from the source. Okay? So let's take a look at that from the dog's perspective. This is the dog zone, okay, and this model simulates 10 minutes. And you can see that source started out here pretty heavy, and it starts moving out as the ventilation system continues to run, and that extent of low concentration keeps moving further and further and further away from the source to where it reaches the end of the model time, that 10 minutes. There's low concentration basically filling almost the entirety of that floor space where the dog's going to be running around. So, and then you have these little pockets of higher concentration here with really substantial high concentration, almost the same amount as the source. That's about 30 feet away from the source, though. So that may be a little confusing for the dog and for the handler in terms of if you're not aware of how your dog's behavior may be indicating what's going on. So kind of keep this in mind that when you're in this type of environment and the ventilation system's on, odds are the dog's going to be in odor everywhere, or at least low quantities, low concentration, and it's going to have a harder time because these pockets here will move and they'll form and then they'll go away, and they'll basically be higher concentration and then lower concentration as that ventilation system continues to run. So just something to keep in mind when you're doing a search. Now, the second one is this actually based on a real experience on my side of things. And what this is it's an elevated balcony area that has a ventilation system, so it has floor vents and everything. And I had done a blind search, and basically my dog was hitting on some planters right next to these inlets down here, like hard hits. Solid indications enough to where we were concerned that maybe she had actually found something. And because the person who had done the hide for me, it was a blind search. He said it's like, no, it's not even close. What's going on? And we all trusted my dog. We knew she was right, but I couldn't understand it. So when we finally found the hide, and I looked, here was an inlet, return outlet for the system. Now, normally in these types of facilities, the ventilation system is one centralized one. So it goes to one massive blower, maybe in a basement or up on the roof. And so any odor that gets pulled back in is so diluted by the time it goes through the system, it's really irrelevant. But my concern was because it was such a hard hit over here that maybe I was dealing with an isolated system. So I contacted the maintenance people of the facility, and sure enough, this was the only isolated system in the facility. It was it basically just as I showed, this is simplified, but basically this return outlet went directly to a blower and it fed all of these vents and that was it. No other air was pulled in or it didn't go anyplace else and it wasn't tied into the main system. And so that's why I share this one because it was very unique, but it's something we may encounter as a handler during a search. So the source is inside this garbage can. As I said, there's a return outlet here. And let's just take a look at the model. And you can see it's coming up, it's getting pulled in, and then it's also kind of dropping down onto the floor, which we would expect. And it's going to kind of move around. But you notice that this area of concentration is not really growing quickly. And that's because the airflow, remember, the faster velocities, it slow, basically diffuses it and makes it less concentrated. And so it takes a while to build up to a concentration level that the model will show visually. But then once it does, you can see it starts filling up those ductworks and start coming out of the floor just as we would expect. And that's what was occurring, and I saw it firsthand. So this is a very unique case, but it's something that we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with these types of searches. So again, you can see these plumes. You can see them coming out of the floor vents, but that's because the source was directly here. That doesn't mean, and the biggest thing to keep in mind is these are very low concentrated. Okay, so what was happening when Daisy was hitting on it was there was a planter and the odor was basically collecting within that planter and at a high enough concentration because she was fairly sensitive. And she would basically say, hey, this is the highest concentration in this area, I'm going to call it. But if you're doing your search and you're doing your search pattern properly, you'll note these areas and you'll make sure that okay, we're going to check this out. But you keep doing your search and being aware of hey, there may be some influences of air movement that's potentially pulling and feeding this. And but as you get over to the actual source, well, it's so concentrated here. If your dog got over here, it would detect it immediately. So those are kind of things. These are all very low concentrated. And depending on the system, depending on the source of odor, it may not even be a factor. This was just one where it just happened to be in my experience, so I wanted to share it so that you guys could all learn from my experience. Now, this third model and last one is probably one of the most complicated and the ones that, particularly in the explosives world, that we're going to deal with quite regularly. And what this is a large gymnasium, and you can see the bleachers and two levels. So you got the main floor bleachers and then the upper level bleachers, and then you have four main ducts that are feeding the ventilation system, each one with a separate blower. Okay, so these large venues, that's what it's going to be. You may have these multiple systems, Okay, and we have our return outlet, so that's going to be pulling the air from down here, but it's also going to be pulling fresh air from the roof. Okay, and then it's going to be blowing out down and down onto the floor from each of these four locations. So I have three hides. I got one, two, three. So one on the wall on the floor, one on the lower floor underneath the bleachers, and one on the upper level underneath the bleachers, just so that we can see the difference. And it's important to understand that each one of these sources is giving off the exact same amount of odor. Okay, that's going to be critical to understand. So we're going to now look at the model, and this simulates 20 minutes. Okay, and one thing I'd like you to pay attention. So this wall one, it's staying pretty consistent. There's odor moving, but what about this one over here? It's almost like it's not putting out any odor, even though it is. Okay, this one you can see it, but it's sporadic. But it's definitely more consistent than the one under that bleacher. And we're going to look at a different perspective in just a minute so that you can see this one a little bit better. But so this is 20 minutes, and we're just going to let this run through, and you can kind of get a feel for how much that air is actually moving in that environment and how that may complicate your search. In So now you can see, again, this is after 20 minutes, you can just kind of see how this whole looping, all this impact of the downward flows and the upward flows and everything. And if you notice, there was no odor that was actually coming out in concentrated levels from the inlet. So that's that example of a system can pull the odor in, but because of the blowers, it diffuses it so much it's not an issue in the actual search. But let's look at this from a different perspective. Okay, and so this is that main floor level odor, the one that basically didn't show much. And this is the upper level underneath the bleachers, and this is the one with the wall. So let's run this model, same thing, 20 minutes. And you see initially that one actually showed something, but it disappeared very quickly. So all that means is that the concentration levels from that particular source are so low that the model won't visually show it. Now I could change the settings and see it, but this to see the movement, see the effects, I left it at this. And you can see this other one, the one against the wall, that's having the least impact, but it's breaking up. And we covered that in prior models, the effect of turbulence diffusion and shear dispersion. Okay, the velocities and the eddies caused by the airflow cause diffusion. Diffusion basically just means spreading out, getting less concentrated. Now, let's take a look at this one. So this is the main one. The wall one makes sense. It's pushing up the wall. It's getting diffused as it goes out, but it's staying pretty consistent. This upper one, though not as consistent as this lower wall one, it's still, it was visually there. But this one, after the initial maybe, you know, 30 seconds or a minute, it basically showed no odor coming off of it of any detectable level. And so let's see what was going on in terms of the airflow. And when I look at the streamers, and we're just looking at the particle paths of what is the airflow over that particular area, and you can see it's coming down, and then it's going through the bleachers, and then it's going horizontal. Okay, and you can see it, and this is the source right here. You can see this airflow coming across underneath the bleachers. And this is a better view of it. We're looking at the bleachers from the end. We can see that airflow coming down from the vent and then going through the bleachers. So a lot of turbulence there, but then it's hitting that floor and it's going across that floor. And it's doing it at enough velocity with enough flow, and likely because it's combined, because this one's probably coming from the other direction, and it's creating just a lot of turbulence underneath this that odor can't maintain a concentrated level. Doesn't mean it's not detectable, far from it. It just means you're going to have to get a lot closer to it. Now let's take a look at this. This is just a cross section of our model space. Okay, so this is my ductwork. So this is my return outlet. It comes around. This is the downward vents. This is where the blowers are. This is the fresh air. This is the upper level bleachers, lower level bleachers, lower level, upper level. Okay, so hopefully you're oriented on that one. When the system turns on, you see the air being pulled in. That includes the fresh air from the roof. And then from there, the air is pushed out, and it's not in a column. It's more of in a cone shape because of the veins on the ductwork. Okay, it's designed to spread that air out. Okay, so that's coming down, and as that's coming down, that's where things start getting a little crazy. This is kind of a snapshot of the overall view. This is just one cross section. Now imagine this in the whole three-dimensional space, and that air is moving everywhere. It's as it's designed to do. Okay, so there's a lot of circulation, a lot of eddies, and that creates so much turbulence diffusion that's why those odor plumes looked as chaotic as they did, and that's what we're dealing with in these systems. Now, let's try to summarize this as best we can, and I'll give you a little bit of tips from my experience. And you guys can take this whatever way you want, but bottom line is read the vent, not the room. And what that means is the ventilation system is designed to circulate and exchange air. It's designed to mix it up, like insanely mix it up. So don't guess, don't even try to guess which way the air is moving in a room or a space if that system is active. Okay, you're not going to be able to look at that entire space and go, oh, the air is doing all of this, particularly, and you just saw in that gymnasium, there's no way you could visualize that. But what you can do and what you should do is look at how the individual vents are moving air both in and out of that space you're working in. And then use that understanding when you're detailing that specific area. Okay, so if you have a single vent that, say, coming against a floor vent, and there's an odor source nearby or behind it against the wall, well, I understand that that floor vent is pushing up. Well, the air is then going to move up. It's going to hit the ceiling. It's going to circulate around, and at some point, it's going to drop back down. It could be all the way over on that far wall, or it could be down here, depending on if there's a floor vent on this side. And then on the opposite side, and we saw this just on that last model, is if we have a ceiling vent and it's pushing down, it's going to hit that floor and push out, and it's going to circulate around. And depending on how big the space is, that circulation could be smaller and away from the walls, or it can be pushing it out to the wall and then up. Okay, so look at the vents, and there's lots of vents. There's wall vents. I mean, there's long vents. There's dozens of types of vents out there. And that's what I would encourage you to do, is just look at the vents in the environment you're in and understand and see if they're moving air, understand, okay, this vent is moving air this way. I know in this particular area, this is how the air is moving. The rest of the room, I'm not even going to guess. Okay. So how do I deal with that? How, if I can't visualize how the air is moving in that particular space, or that entire zone, if you will, well, the way I'd look at it is I want to keep a very tight search pattern. When I go into that room or that building, whatever it is, I want to decide on that search pattern and right from the start and stick to it, making sure that the dog gets as close as possible to potential hide locations. Because as you saw, some of those sources, depending on the flows, you really had to get close for that dog to detect it. Okay, so understand that. So that's what's sticking about the search pattern, and letting your dog run around off leash may not be the wisest thing to do, because the dog's going to be potentially in odor everywhere, and it's going to burn itself out. So search pattern that's controlled, methodical, probably the best bet in my opinion when I'm doing structures that have ventilation systems that are active. And then just understand that by turning on or turning off a ventilation system can have a dramatic impact on odor movement. and the availability of it for your dog. And this does include the openings or closing of door windows. And we saw that on the prior models with the wind and doors in that big warehouse. So if you didn't see that, go back to video 5 and you'll see some pretty good examples of the influence of doors being open and multiple doors being open. Okay, and there's being a wind. Okay, well, upcoming lessons is going to be video 7. We're going to talk about wind speed and obstruction effects, and specifically on odor concentration. I've had some good questions about that, and we're going to use the SAR model, so mountainous terrain. But I'm also going to be playing around with some vegetation and cars just so that we can see the differences in continuous flows versus obstructed flows. And then, urban terrain, Venturi effect, buried hives, thermal convection of air within a room, and, vegetation influence. We're going to can do as best we can. And I'm always open to suggestions. So by all means, don't hesitate to let me know what you think would be a good model to run. And if you got any questions or suggestions on modeling and explanations, please send them my way. And I hope this has been enjoyable for you and that you have a great rest of your day.